The year 1694 marked the ascension of Sultan Husayn to the Safavid throne, an event that unknowingly set the stage for the empire's dramatic collapse. He was the eldest son of the preceding Shah, Sulaiman II, and his reign would be the last of true Safavid authority. Raised within the cloistered walls of the royal harem, Husayn possessed scant knowledge of the intricate art of governance. His father, on his deathbed, had offered the court a fateful choice: Husayn for peace, or his brother Abbas for power. The influential court eunuchs, desiring a pliable ruler, decisively chose the mild-mannered Husayn. His easygoing nature and disinterest in state affairs quickly earned him the dismissive nickname Yakshidir, meaning very well. Early in his reign, the deeply pious Husayn delegated immense authority to the powerful cleric, Muhammad Baqir Mailesi. This delegation led to the stringent enforcement of Sharia law across the Persian Empire. Strict measures were enacted against the mystical Sufi order, a significant shift in Safavid policy. Prohibitions on alcohol and opium were rigorously implemented, altering the social fabric of the cities. Women's freedom in public spaces was curtailed, reflecting the new conservative religious climate. Despite this focus on religious piety, the empire's foundational weaknesses continued to fester and grow. Husayn's personal profligacy saw the royal treasury depleted for extravagant, non-essential projects. The mullahs, empowered by the Shah, exerted an ever-increasing and often suffocating control over the government. The once mighty Safavid military machine had been allowed to rust and decay through neglect. Lack of strong, centralized leadership created a power vacuum that invited internal dissent. Endless royal intrigues and factionalism paralyzed the court, preventing any effective response to crises. Civil unrest began to bubble up in various provinces, testing the frayed authority of the central government. The most dire threat, however, was coalescing in the empire's rugged eastern frontier, in Afghanistan. The predominantly Sunni Afghan tribes grew increasingly resentful of the Safavids' enforced Shia orthodoxy. In 1709, the Ghilzai Afghans of Kandahar, under the leadership of the charismatic Mirwais Hotak, rose in open rebellion. Mirwais Hotak, a respected tribal chief, had initially tried to warn the Shah of the governor's tyranny. His warnings were ignored, and he was unjustly imprisoned, which only hardened his resolve. Through cunning and strategy, he later engineered the assassination of the oppressive Safavid governor, Gurgin Khan. This act ignited widespread revolts across the Afghan territories, shattering Safavid control. After Mirwais's death in 1715, his ambitious son, Mahmud Hotaki, inherited the mantle of leadership. Mahmud continued his father's rebellion with even greater ferocity and strategic vision. In 1716, the Abdalis of Herat also rebelled, further stretching the empire's beleaguered forces. The Safavid military, weakened by years of neglect, failed repeatedly to quell these cascading uprisings. Mahmud Hotaki skillfully defeated the rival Abdalis, consolidating his power as the undisputed leader of the Afghans. With his domestic rivals subdued, he turned his gaze towards the glittering prize, the heartland of Persia itself. Mahmud, driven by immense ambition, launched his first major campaign against the Persian city of Kerman. Although his initial siege of Kerman in 1720 ultimately failed, it was a valuable learning experience. In 1722, Mahmud assembled a formidable army of around 20,000 battle-hardened warriors. This force, though not enormous, was mobile, disciplined, and utterly ruthless. He marched his army across the desolate deserts, heading directly for the magnificent Safavid capital, Isfahan. The decisive and catastrophic confrontation occurred at the Battle of Gunabad on March 8, 1722. The Persian army, though numerically superior with more than double the Afghan numbers, was a hollow force. Their ranks were filled with beautifully outfitted soldiers who lacked the will to fight. Crippling internal dissensions and incompetent leadership plagued the Safavid command structure. The Safavid right wing initially charged with great vigor, causing a brief panic among the Afghan lines. However, instead of pressing their advantage, the Persian cavalry broke formation to plunder the Afghan camp. The Safavid vizier, Muhammad Quraysh Khan Shamlu, disastrously failed to commit his reserves to support the successful charge. This fatal hesitation allowed Mahmud Hotaki the crucial time needed to regroup his shaken forces. The Afghans effectively utilized their camel-mounted light artillery, the Zamburaks, to devastating effect. These mobile cannons unleashed a hail of fire that tore through the disorganized Persian formations. Battle quickly turned into a rout, a crushing and humiliating defeat for the Safavid Empire. Estimates suggest that between 5,000 and 15,000 Safavid soldiers were killed in the slaughter. The stunning victory at Gunabad left the road to Isfahan completely open for the triumphant Afghans. Mahmud's army, despite lacking heavy siege equipment, promptly established a blockade around the sprawling capital. The Great Siege of Isfahan began, a 6-month ordeal of starvation, disease, and despair. The city's once vibrant markets fell silent, their stalls empty and covered in dust. The citizens, accustomed to luxury, were soon reduced to eating their own pack animals. As the siege dragged on, the desperation intensified, leading to horrific acts of cannibalism. The beautiful gardens and tree-lined avenues of the city were stripped bare for firewood. Shah Husayn, trapped within his palace, proved to be an indecisive and ineffective leader. Several ill-organized and desperate sorties from the city were easily repulsed by the disciplined Afghans. The Shah's Georgian vassal, Vakhtang Vikst of Kartli, treacherously refused to send his powerful army to relieve the city. This betrayal extinguished one of the last remaining hopes for the besieged capital. Husayn's own son, Tahmasp, managed to escape the city with a small contingent of soldiers. He attempted to raise a relief force from the provinces, but his efforts were largely fruitless. The provincial nobility, sensing the collapse of the dynasty, were reluctant to commit their forces. Inside Isfahan, the death toll from starvation and disease climbed to catastrophic levels. Over 80,000 civilians are estimated to have perished during the horrific siege. Finally, facing total annihilation and with no hope remaining, Sultan Husayn chose to surrender. On October 23, 1722, the gates of Isfahan were opened to the Afghan conquerors. Shah Husayn, clad in deep mourning black, rode out of the city on a gaunt, pathetic horse. He proceeded to the Afghan camp to perform the ultimate act of submission. In a ceremony of profound humiliation, he formally abdicated his throne. He personally took the royal plume from his own turban and placed it upon Mahmud Hotaki's head. This single act declared Mahmud the new Shah of Persia, ending centuries of Safavid rule. The fall of Isfahan sent shockwaves throughout the region and the world. The Safavid dynasty, which had shaped Persian identity for over 200 years, was effectively shattered. Although two more Safavid princes would later claim the title of Shah, they were mere puppets. Their reigns were short, and they held no real power over the fragmented empire. The former Shah, Husayn, was kept as a captive, a living symbol of the old regime's failure. Mahmud Hotaki's rule over Persia was brief, brutal, and plagued by his own growing madness. he grew increasingly paranoid, fearing conspiracies from the remaining Safavid loyalists. This cruelty turned even his own followers against him, sealing his fate. In 1725, Mahmud was assassinated by his own cousin, Ashraf Hotaki, who then seized the throne. Ashraf's reign was immediately challenged by both internal rivals and external powers. The power vacuum created by the Safavid collapse invited foreign intervention. Tsar Peter the Great of Russia seized the opportunity to invade northern Iran. Russian forces quickly occupied the valuable territories along the Caspian Sea. Simultaneously, the Ottoman Empire, the Safavids' long-standing rival, moved into western and northwestern Persia. The Ottomans captured cities like Hamadan and Tabriz, carving out their own piece of the dying empire. Ashraf Hotaki, facing a two-front war against the Ottomans and Russians, grew increasingly desperate. He began to see the captive Sultan Husayn as a potential bargaining chip or threat. Fearing that the Ottomans might try to restore Husayn to the throne as their own puppet, Ashraf made a final, cruel decision. He ordered the execution of the last legitimate Safavid Shah. In September 1727, soldiers entered Husayn's prison quarters. The former emperor, who had lived his final years in quiet captivity, met his end with a degree of dignity. Sultan Husayn was beheaded, a tragic and ignominious end for the ruler of a once great dynasty. His death marked the definitive end of any hope for a simple Safavid restoration. The period following Husayn's fall was one of relentless chaos, warfare, and foreign domination. It would not be until the rise of the brilliant general, Nader Shah, that order would be restored. Nader would eventually expel the Afghans and the Ottomans, forging a new, powerful Persian empire from the ashes. But the Safavid dynasty, the dynasty of Shah Abbas the Great, was never truly restored to its former glory. The tragic fall of Sultan Husayn served as a harsh lesson on the dangers of weak leadership and internal decay. His story is a somber epilogue to one of the most illustrious chapters in Persian history.